A woman shot and killed with her 3 children nearby. Tonight, we're learning more about the story we first brought you last night at 10 from the family of the woman killed. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kelly Cook. 32-year-old Jasmine Een was killed early Saturday morning, according to police. Cordell Harris, the victim's boyfriend, has been charged with second-degree murder in her death.
Mommy, wake up. Please wake up. Those were the desperate screams that 17-year-old Destiny heard coming from downstairs at 4:33 a.m. on December 9th, 2023. But when she ran to help, she found her mother Jasmine Een face down in a pool of blood, with 3 bullet holes in her back. Standing over the body was the man Jasmine had been trying to leave, and he was already dialing 911 to report that mysterious masked man had just killed his girlfriend. What those 3 children witnessed that night would expose one of the most calculated lies ever told to Memphis police. Because Cordell Harris didn't just murder the mother of 8 children in cold blood. He shot her in the back as she was running away from him, then spent the next 6 hours convincing everyone he was the victim. The same man who had posted, "I love this woman," on social media just 12 hours earlier had just executed her while her babies slept upstairs. But here's what will make your blood run cold. This wasn't even Cordell's first time putting a woman in the hospital. 2 years earlier, he had shot at his pregnant girlfriend while she was driving, threatened to kill her if she left him, and walked away without spending a single day in jail. The system had already failed once, and now Jasmine Een was dead because of it. To understand how Jasmine Een ended up dead on her living room floor, we have to go back to the moment her world completely fell apart. Just 2 years before meeting Cordell Harris, Jasmine lost her husband, the father of all 8 of her children, in a tragedy that left her drowning in grief and financial panic. Imagine being 30 years old with 8 kids ranging from teenagers to toddlers, and suddenly you're doing it all alone. Jasmine wasn't just grieving a husband. She was staring at a mountain of bills she couldn't pay, school clothes she couldn't buy, and 8 pairs of eyes looking to her for answers she didn't have. Her hair braiding business was good, but not good enough to support a family of 9 on her own. She was working 16-hour days just to keep the lights on, and the stress was eating her alive. The woman who had once been confident and independent was now posting desperate messages on social media about struggling to make ends meet. She was vulnerable, exhausted, and desperately searching for someone to help carry the load. That's exactly when predators strike. When strong women are at their weakest moment, when they're so overwhelmed they'll accept help from anyone willing to offer it. Enter Cordell Harris in 2022, showing up like the answer to all of Jasmine's prayers. He didn't just offer love. He offered financial stability, help with the kids, and relief from the crushing pressure she'd been carrying alone. Within weeks of meeting him, Cordell was paying bills, buying groceries, and playing daddy to children who desperately missed having a father figure in their lives. Jasmine's social media transformation was dramatic and telling. Her posts went from worried messages about making rent to videos of her and Cordell laughing together, with captions like, "God sent me an angel and finally found my king." In one particularly heartbreaking video from when she was 8 months pregnant with what would be her last child, she proudly announced, "He stays with me. He pays all my bills. He takes care of all my kids." But what looked like a fairy tale romance was actually a textbook case of love bombing, the process predators use to make themselves indispensable to their victims. Cordell wasn't helping Jasmine out of love. He was creating financial dependency that would make it nearly impossible for her to leave. He was systematically taking control of her life, one paid bill at a time. The red flags were there from the beginning, but when you're drowning and someone throws you a life preserver, you don't ask too many questions about where it came from. Jasmine's family later revealed they had concerns about Cordell from day one, but she was so grateful to finally have help that she dismissed their warnings as jealousy or interference. What made Cordell Harris so dangerous was how normal he appeared to everyone around him. Neighbors described him as quiet and polite, the kind of man who would wave when he saw you and help carry your groceries if you asked. He and Jasmine looked like any other young couple trying to make it work. 2 people in love, building a life together with a house full of kids. Even Jasmine's closest friends bought into the illusion. They saw a man who showed up to school events, who posted cute videos with the children, who seemed genuinely invested in being a good stepfather. When domestic violence looks like what we see in movies, obvious bruises, screaming fights, dramatic confrontations, it's easier to spot. But Cordell Harris was a master manipulator who understood that the best way to control someone is to make everyone else think you're the perfect boyfriend. The most dangerous abusers are the ones who can flip a switch between public charm and private terror. They're the men who get described as such a nice guy, right up until the moment they're being led away in handcuffs. Cordell Harris had spent 2 years building his reputation as Jasmine's savior, which meant when she finally tried to tell people what was really happening behind closed doors, nobody wanted to believe her. What Jasmine didn't know when she fell in love with Cordell Harris was that she wasn't his first victim. She was just the one who didn't survive. In August of 2021, just 1 year before he met Jasmine, Cordell had been arrested for aggravated assault and domestic violence against his then-girlfriend, a woman who was 8 months pregnant with his child. The details of that case read like a preview of Jasmine's murder, and it should have kept Cordell locked up for years. According to police reports, Cordell's pregnant girlfriend had tried to break up with him after months of escalating abuse and control. His response was to follow her to her car and open fire while she was behind the wheel, trying to drive away from him. Think about that for a second. This man shot at a pregnant woman who was carrying his own child, simply because she had the audacity to try to leave him. But the most chilling part of the police report wasn't the shooting itself. It was what Cordell told his girlfriend afterward. He looked her in the eye and said, "If you ever try to leave me again, I will kill you." This wasn't a threat made in the heat of passion. This was a calculated promise from a man who had already proven he was willing to use deadly force to maintain control. The woman was so terrified that she initially refused to cooperate with prosecutors, knowing that Cordell was capable of following through on his threats. Here's where the story gets absolutely infuriating. That case was dismissed due to lack of prosecution. Despite having a victim with gunshot evidence, despite having witnesses, despite having a clear pattern of escalating violence, the system just let it slide. Cordell Harris walked free, and less than 2 years later, another woman was dead. If prosecutors had done their job in 2021, Jasmine Een would still be alive today, raising her 8 children and building her hair-braiding empire. What makes Cordell Harris so terrifying isn't just that he killed Jasmine. It's that her murder was the predictable outcome of a pattern he had already established. Domestic violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. It follows a cycle that gets more dangerous every time the abuser gets away with it. Cordell had learned from his first case that he could threaten women, shoot at them, and face zero consequences. The progression from his first victim to Jasmine shows exactly how these predators operate. With his pregnant girlfriend, he used guns to threaten and control, but ultimately let her live when she submitted. With Jasmine, when threats and control weren't enough to keep her from leaving, he escalated to execution. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of lost control. This was a man who had spent 2 years planning what he would do if his next victim tried to escape. Criminal psychologists call this graduated intimidation, the process by which abusers test boundaries and escalate violence when their previous tactics stop working. Cordell's first victim survived because she learned to stay quiet and submit. Jasmine died because she found the courage to fight back, and Cordell had already proven he was willing to kill rather than lose control. When police searched Jasmine's home after the shooting, they discovered that Cordell Harris wasn't just an abuser. He was running a criminal enterprise right under her roof. Hidden throughout the house were multiple stolen firearms, including the 9mm handgun covered in blood that he used to kill Jasmine. That weapon had been stolen during a car burglary in December of 2021, just months after his first domestic violence arrest. But the stolen handgun was just the beginning. Investigators also found a stolen rifle, substantial quantities of marijuana and cocaine, and evidence that Cordell was dealing drugs from Jasmine's home. This means that while Jasmine thought she was building a legitimate life with a man who loved her, she was actually providing cover for a criminal who was using her house as his base of operations. The presence of all those weapons raises terrifying questions about Cordell's long-term intentions. Was he planning to kill Jasmine eventually anyway? Was the arsenal meant to intimidate her into staying quiet about his criminal activities? Or was he building up firepower for future victims? What we do know is that men who stockpile illegal weapons aren't planning peaceful breakups. They're preparing for war. Most disturbing of all, Cordell had managed to hide this entire criminal operation from Jasmine for over a year. She thought she knew the man she was living with, the man she was raising her children around, but she had no idea she was sleeping next to someone who was capable of executing her without a second thought. The same hands that helped her children with homework were the hands that pulled the trigger 3 times, shooting her in the back as she ran for her life. The weekend before December 9th, 2023, something shifted in Jasmine Eason's world. Family members would later tell police that she had been making phone calls, asking questions about safe places to stay, and quietly reaching out for help in a way she had never done before. After nearly 2 years of living in fear, Jasmine had finally reached her breaking point and decided she was done being Cordell Harris's victim. What pushed her over the edge wasn't one dramatic incident. It was the slow realization that her children were starting to see through Cordell's mask. Her 17-year-old daughter had begun asking uncomfortable questions about why mommy seemed so scared all the time, why Cordell got angry over such small things, and why their house always felt tense even when everyone was smiling. Jasmine knew that if she didn't act soon, her children would grow up thinking this kind of relationship was normal. On December 7th, just 2 days before her murder, Jasmine made a decision that would seal her fate. She called her sister and said the words that Cordell had spent 2 years making sure she would never say. "I'm leaving him, and I need help." That phone call was the beginning of the end, because what Jasmine didn't understand was that men like Cordell Harris have been planning for that moment since the very first day they meet their victims. Her family immediately began making arrangements, finding her a place to stay, planning how to move her and the children safely, even discussing getting a restraining order. But they made one critical mistake that cost domestic violence victims their lives every single day. They assumed they had time to plan. They thought Jasmine could keep pretending everything was normal for just a few more days while they got everything ready. They had no idea that Cordell was already watching her every move, reading her phone, and preparing for the conversation he knew was coming. In the 48 hours leading up to the shooting, Jasmine's children began noticing changes in the house that they couldn't quite understand. The older kids later told investigators that their mother had been cleaning frantically, organizing papers, and having hushed phone conversations that stopped the moment anyone walked into the room. To them, it looked like she was getting ready for something, but they had no idea she was preparing to run for her life. 17-year-old Destiny would later tell police that on December 8th, the day before the murder, she heard her mother and Cordell arguing in their bedroom late at night. It wasn't the usual kind of argument they were used to hearing. This one was different, quieter, but somehow more intense. She said her mother's voice sounded different, stronger, like she was finally standing up for herself instead of just trying to keep the peace. The younger children sensed the tension too, even if they couldn't understand it. The 2-year-old started clinging to Jasmine more than usual, and the middle kids became unusually quiet and well-behaved, as if they instinctively knew that something dangerous was building in their house. Children are like emotional barometers. They can sense when the adults in their lives are preparing for something terrible, even when nobody tells them what's happening. What breaks your heart is knowing that these kids were living through the calm before the storm, and they had no way to understand that their mother was about to risk everything to try to give them a better life. They went to bed on December 8th thinking they were just dealing with another one of Mommy and Cordell's fights. They had no idea they were about to become witnesses to their mother's execution. December 9th began like any other day, but by 4 in the morning, it had become the day that would destroy 8 children's lives forever. Based on the evidence investigators collected and the children's testimonies, we can piece together the exact moment when Jasmine's escape plan turned into her death sentence. It happened when she finally said the words that Cordell Harris had been dreading for 2 years. "I'm done. I'm leaving you, and I'm taking my children." Those words triggered something in Cordell that his previous girlfriend had seen before, the transformation from charming boyfriend to cold-blooded killer. This wasn't about love or passion or even anger. This was about control and ownership. In Cordell's mind, Jasmine didn't have the right to leave him, especially not after he had invested so much time and money into her and her children. The most tragic part is that Jasmine probably thought she was being smart by having this conversation at home, where she felt safe, where her children were nearby, where she had some sense of control over the situation. She had no way of knowing that Cordell had already decided what would happen if this day ever came. He had spent 2 years preparing for the possibility that she might try to leave, and he had already made peace with the idea of killing her rather than letting her go. What happened next wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of lost control. It was the execution of a plan that Cordell Harris had been carrying in his mind since the day he moved into Jasmine's house. The only question was whether she would submit and stay, or whether she would force him to follow through on the promise he had made to his last girlfriend. "If you try to leave me, I will kill you." At approximately 4 a.m. on December 9th, 2023, the conversation that Jasmine Een had been planning for days finally began. According to the testimony of her 17-year-old daughter, who was awakened by raised voices, it started in their bedroom with Jasmine calmly, but firmly telling Cordell that their relationship was over. She wasn't screaming or crying. She was speaking with the quiet determination of a woman who had finally found her courage. Cordell's response was immediate and terrifying. Within minutes, the conversation escalated from Jasmine's calm declaration to Cordell's furious demands that she take back what she had said. The children upstairs could hear him getting louder, more aggressive, asking her who had been filling her head with ideas and threatening to make her regret ever thinking about leaving him. This was the moment when Jasmine realized that the man she had been living with for 2 years was about to show her his true face. What happened next shows just how desperate Jasmine had become to protect herself and her children. When Cordell began advancing on her aggressively, she grabbed a kitchen knife, not to attack him, but to create enough distance between them so she could get to her children and get out of the house. She was a 120-pound woman facing off against a man who outweighed her by 60 pounds and had already proven he was willing to use deadly force against women. The knife wound on Cordell's hand wasn't the result of a vicious attack. It was the defensive action of a terrified mother who knew that if she didn't fight back in that moment, she and possibly her children were going to die. But what Jasmine didn't know was that Cordell had been expecting this exact scenario, and he was ready for it. While she was grabbing a knife to defend herself, he was reaching for the loaded 9mm handgun he kept hidden in their bedroom. The moment Cordell pulled out that gun, Jasmine knew she was going to die. According to the physical evidence and the children's testimonies, she didn't freeze or beg or try to negotiate. She ran. She dropped the knife and made a desperate sprint toward the living room, probably hoping to reach the front door or at least get far enough away from her sleeping children that they wouldn't have to witness what was about to happen. She almost made it. The bullet trajectory and blood evidence show that Jasmine had reached the living room and was just feet away from the front door when Cordell caught up to her. But instead of shooting her once in a moment of rage, he fired 3 deliberate shots into her back as she was running away from him. This wasn't self-defense or a crime of passion. This was an execution, plain and simple. The first bullet stopped her from running. The second and third bullets made sure she would never run again. Cordell Harris stood over the mother of 8 children and pumped 3 bullets into her back, then watched her collapse face first onto the living room floor where her kids would find her just minutes later. The woman who had worked 16-hour days to support her family, who had loved him enough to let him into their lives, was now bleeding out while he calmly planned his next move. What makes this even more horrifying is that the children upstairs heard everything. The argument, the running footsteps, the gunshots, and then the terrifying silence that followed. 17-year-old Destiny would later tell police that she heard her mother screaming, "Please don't," right before the shots were fired, meaning Jasmine knew exactly what was about to happen to her in her final moments. For the next 6 hours, Cordell Harris put on the performance of his life. Instead of calling 911 immediately or trying to help the woman he claimed to love, he spent precious time staging the scene and perfecting his story. He moved the gun, positioned his own knife wound to look more dramatic, and rehearsed the lie he was about to tell police about masked intruders. When he finally called 911 at 4:33 a.m., Cordell's voice was calm and controlled as he reported that unknown men had broken into their house and shot his girlfriend. He told the dispatcher that he had been stabbed while trying to defend her, painting himself as a hero who had fought bravely against overwhelming odds. His performance was so convincing that the first officers on the scene treated him as a victim rather than a suspect. But Cordell made one critical mistake in his planning. He underestimated the children. While he was busy crafting his story about home invaders, 3 young witnesses were processing what they had actually seen and heard. They knew there had been no broken doors, no masked men, no robbery attempt. They knew the truth. The man their mother had trusted to protect their family had just murdered her in cold blood. The most chilling part of Cordell's behavior that morning was how easily he slipped into the role of grieving boyfriend. When paramedics arrived, he was crying over Jasmine's body, begging them to save her, telling them how much he loved her. To anyone who didn't know the truth, he looked like a man who had just lost the love of his life in a random act of violence. But those 3 children knew better. They had just watched their mother's boyfriend transform from killer to victim in the span of 30 minutes. When Memphis police officers arrived at Jasmine's home on Rainer Street, they found what appeared to be a textbook home invasion gone wrong. Cordell Harris was sitting on the front steps, blood dripping from his left hand, tears streaming down his face as he watched paramedics work frantically on his girlfriend. His story was detailed, emotional, and completely believable. 2 masked men had kicked in their bedroom door, demanded money, stabbed him when he tried to fight back, and shot Jasmine when she screamed. Detective Marcus Williams, who had seen hundreds of domestic violence cases, later admitted that Cordell's performance that morning was one of the most convincing acts he had ever witnessed. The man wasn't just crying. He was sobbing, begging the paramedics to save Jasmine, asking officers if they thought she was going to make it. He volunteered to give a statement immediately, insisted on going to the hospital to be with her, and even offered to help police search for the attackers. Cordell's story had all the right details to make it believable. He described the intruders' clothing, their approximate heights, even the type of gun one of them was carrying. He explained that they must have been watching the house, because they seemed to know exactly where to find money and jewelry. Most importantly, he had a visible injury that supported his claim of being a fellow victim rather than the perpetrator. For the first 6 hours of the investigation, Memphis police were looking for 2 dangerous men who had committed a brutal home invasion. They set up a perimeter around the neighborhood, interviewed potential witnesses, and began checking security cameras from nearby businesses. Meanwhile, the real killer was being treated as a victim in the emergency room, maintaining his story even as doctors stitched up the hand that Jasmine had cut while fighting for her life. Everything changed when Detective Williams made the decision to interview Jasmine's children separately from Cordell. Standard procedure in domestic violence cases is to speak with children away from potential perpetrators, but many investigators skip this step when the adult victim can't speak for themselves. Detective Williams's decision to follow protocol saved this case and exposed Cordell's lies. 17-year-old Destiny was the first to break the case wide open. When asked to describe what she heard that morning, she told Detective Williams something that made his blood run cold. There weren't any men who broke in. I heard my mama and Cordell fighting. Then I heard her running and screaming. Then I heard the gunshots. He's lying about everything. Her 2 younger siblings, ages 12 and 8, corroborated every detail of her account. The children's testimonies weren't just different from Cordell's story. They were the complete opposite. They told police they had never heard any doors being kicked in, never heard any men's voices except for Cordell's, and never heard anyone demanding money. What they did hear was their mother pleading for her life, Cordell shouting at her, and then the sound of gunshots, followed by terrifying silence. Most damaging of all was what 12-year-old Marcus told Detective Williams. After the shooting stopped, I heard Cordell moving around downstairs for a long time before he called the police. He wasn't hurt bad enough that he couldn't walk around and do stuff. This single statement from a child destroyed Cordell's entire narrative about being incapacitated by a stab wound and immediately calling for help. Armed with the children's testimonies, investigators returned to the crime scene with fresh eyes and immediately began finding evidence that contradicted every aspect of Cordell's story. The first red flag was the bedroom door that had supposedly been kicked in by intruders. There were no marks, no damage, No signs of forced entry anywhere in the house. The door was perfectly intact, with no splintering around the frame or damage to the lock. The blood evidence told an even more damning story. Crime scene analysts found that Jasmine's blood was concentrated in a trail leading from the bedroom to the living room, exactly matching the children's account of her running from Cordell before being shot. There was no blood evidence supporting Cordell's claim that the attack happened in the bedroom, and no signs of a struggle between him and any intruders. But the smoking gun, literally, was the 9mm handgun that investigators found hidden under a couch cushion, covered in blood and still warm to the touch. Ballistics testing confirmed that this weapon had fired all 3 bullets that killed Jasmine, and fingerprint analysis showed only Cordell's prints on the grip. Most importantly, this gun had been reported stolen in a car burglary 2 years earlier, meaning Cordell had been carrying an illegal weapon the entire time he lived with Jasmine. The final nail in Cordell's coffin came from gunshot residue testing. When police swabbed his hands at the hospital, they found fresh powder burns on his right hand and traces of gunpowder on his clothing. This evidence proved that Cordell had recently fired a weapon, something that would have been impossible if he had only been stabbed by intruders, as he claimed. The science didn't lie, even when Cordell did. When Detective Williams confronted Cordell with the physical evidence and the children's testimonies, the man who had spent 8 hours playing the grieving victim finally began to crack. His first response was to attack the credibility of the children, claiming they were confused, traumatized, or lying to get back at him for disciplining them. But when presented with the blood evidence and gunshot residue results, Cordell knew his elaborate story was falling apart. The moment that broke him was when Detective Williams played him a recording of 17-year-old Destiny describing exactly what she had heard that morning. As her voice filled the interrogation room, detailing her mother's final moments with heartbreaking accuracy, Cordell's composure finally shattered. He put his head in his hands and said the words that sealed his fate. Okay. It wasn't like I said it was. Cordell's new story was still a lie, but it was a lie that admitted he had killed Jasmine. He claimed that they had been arguing when she went crazy and stabbed him, forcing him to defend himself by shooting her. He insisted it was self-defense, that he never meant to kill her, that the whole thing was a tragic accident. But the evidence told a different story. 3 bullets in the back of a woman who was running away don't support any claim of self-defense. What Cordell still refused to admit, even after confessing to the shooting, was the truth that everyone already knew. He had executed Jasmine Een because she tried to leave him, and then spent 8 hours lying to police while her children sat in trauma counseling, believing their mother had been killed by strangers. Even in his confession, Cordell Harris couldn't stop trying to control the narrative, but it was too late. The truth was out, and justice was finally coming for Jasmine. Looking back at Jasmine Een's murder, there were 3 critical moments when intervention could have saved her life, and understanding these failures is essential to preventing future tragedies. The first and most obvious failure was the justice system's complete collapse in 2021 when Cordell Harris shot at his pregnant girlfriend. That case had everything prosecutors needed: physical evidence, witness testimony, and a clear pattern of escalating violence. Yet they let it slide due to lack of prosecution. Think about what that dismissal really meant. The system essentially told Cordell Harris that he could threaten women with guns, shoot at them while they tried to escape, and face 0 consequences. That dismissal wasn't just a legal technicality. It was a green light for him to escalate his violence with his next victim. Every prosecutor who worked on that case should have known they were potentially signing another woman's death warrant. The second failure was the community's willingness to accept Cordell's public persona without questioning what was happening behind closed doors. Neighbors, friends, even some family members bought into his act because he was charming and helpful when people were watching. But domestic violence doesn't happen on front porches or at neighborhood barbecues. It happens in bedrooms and kitchens where nobody else can see. We have to stop assuming that abusive men look like monsters, because the most dangerous ones look exactly like the guy next door. The third and most heartbreaking failure was the lack of a proper support system for Jasmine when she finally decided to leave. Her family was willing to help, but they didn't understand that the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is when the victim tries to escape. They thought they had time to plan, Time to get everything organized. Time to do it safely. They had no idea that men like Cordell Harris start planning their victims' murders the moment they sense any threat to their control. Cordell Harris didn't just kill one person that December morning. He destroyed an entire family structure that will never recover. 8 children are now growing up without their mother, and 3 of them will carry the trauma of witnessing her execution for the rest of their lives. 17-year-old Destiny, who had the courage to tell police the truth, will forever live with the knowledge that she heard her mother's final moments and couldn't save her. The younger children are dealing with a different kind of trauma, the confusion of losing both their mother and the man they had been taught to call their father figure. These kids don't just need grief counseling. They need intensive therapy to help them understand that what they witnessed wasn't normal, that love doesn't look like violence, and that they are not responsible for what happened to their mother. Beyond the immediate family, Jasmine's murder sent shockwaves through the Memphis community, particularly among women who recognize their own stories in hers. How many other women are currently living with men who have histories of violence that the system chose to ignore? How many other mothers are right now planning their own escapes, not knowing that they're potentially planning their own funerals? The financial impact alone is staggering. 8 children who have lost their primary caretaker and income source, a family that will need years of therapy, a community that has lost a talented businesswoman who was contributing to the local economy. One man's need to control and dominate didn't just end one life. It damaged dozens of others in ways that will ripple forward for generations. Here's what every person watching this needs to understand. Jasmine Een's story is not unique. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 3 women are murdered by their intimate partners every single day in America, and 72% of those murders happen when the victim is trying to leave or has recently left the relationship. Jasmine's death was not an isolated tragedy. It was part of a pattern that we can and must interrupt. The warning signs that could have saved Jasmine's life are the same ones that could save someone you know right now. If you know a woman whose partner controls her finances, isolates her from family and friends, has a history of violence against previous partners, or has ever threatened to hurt her if she leaves, that woman is in mortal danger. Don't wait for bruises to become visible. Don't wait for her to ask for help. And don't assume she has time to plan a safe exit. Most importantly, we need to demand better from our justice system. Cases like Cordell Harris's 2021 domestic violence charge cannot be allowed to disappear due to lack of prosecution. Every dismissed domestic violence case represents a potential future murder victim, and prosecutors need to understand that their decisions have life and death consequences for women they will never meet. If you're currently in an abusive relationship, please understand that leaving is the most dangerous thing you will ever do, but staying is not safer. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233, and they can help you create a safety plan that might save your life. Jasmine Een thought she had to handle this alone, but you don't. There are people trained to help women escape dangerous men, and they understand that every day you wait increases your risk of becoming another statistic. Jasmine's story must become the last time we fail to protect a mother who is trying to save herself and her children. Her 8 kids are watching us now, waiting to see if we learned anything from their mother's death, waiting to see if we will do better for the next woman who needs our help. We owe it to them, and to Jasmine's memory, to make sure that no other family has to endure what they've been through. Because the next time someone like Cordell Harris decides that if he can't have his victim, no one can, we need to be ready to stop him before he pulls that trigger.